That's Jonathan Reynolds, Labour MP and Shadow Business Secretary, who joins us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Obviously, energy and price rises and all the, just the horrific cost of living increases we are going to be seeing in the coming months and years, indeed. Very much top of the news. But you've done some new analysis at Labour about how businesses have lost out. Tell us about it.
Yes, well, what we have been able to reveal today is actually that for business losses, what we're seeing is actually a situation that was worse than during the pandemic. So quite rightly, the impact on households has been centre stage in terms of the energy crisis. But it's important to say this is a huge deal for businesses as well, who, of course, aren't covered by the cap. So they're getting those higher bills at extreme levels already. And that's the case for smaller businesses, for restaurants, for cafes, for pubs. But also, obviously, there's an element to this, which is the larger energy-intensive users, the steel industry, the ceramics industry, who are in major trouble. And many of those are not able to operate at full production. We're seeing, for instance, fertilizer plants closed down, which will put higher food prices, pushed further into next year. So we need some real help now. Now, our plan for freezing domestic energy bills obviously gives businesses what they need the most, which is people who've got some money to be able to spend on goods and services in their businesses. But we're also saying there has to be some immediate relief. We'd like to see the rate for small business threshold relief for business rates immediately raised. So you're seeing a cut there for smaller businesses. We'd raise that to £25,000. And as well as that, our plans include a contingency fund for those energy intensive businesses of £1 billion. So real help now. And I cannot stress enough, Julia, how important this is to get help to people who need some hope for the future.
Well, yeah, certainly people do want help now. Again, it is interesting. You mentioned the domestic energy bill cap, and that was what Keir Starmer talked about. And again, the costings on that looking a little bit questionable. It costs a lot more than he said. Welcomed by an awful lot of people, a lot of Tory voters as well as Labour voters very in favour, keeping the cap at where it is right now, 1,971, not allowing it to rise. Was it 3,500 plus in October, and many are talking even £7,000 next year. But isn't it interesting? Labour's just woken up to the idea, businesses are in trouble. It turns out that businesses are having a really, really bad time because they're not actually benefiting at all, such as we benefit from the domestic energy cap. We've been talking about this for ages on this show. Why is it that Keir Starmer, when he talked about helping people, didn't even mention that a few weeks ago?
Well, the policies that we've been putting forward, for instance, that changed to business rates for small business rates relief we've had for many months. I understand because of the fact that every household in the country is facing these pressures in terms of their domestic bill. That has got a lot of attention, and I understand why that is. But I've certainly been talking about the pressures on businesses throughout this time. It's been a major feature of what we've been saying in terms of the wider impact of the energy crisis. And I think that's right. We're trying to get a hearing for this case, and that's why I'm particularly grateful to be able to put it to you today, Julie. But I think it's very important to say, not only, of course, because I know everyone is facing, people will say, what about hospitals? What about schools? Rightly so.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Well, absolutely, an absolutely fair point. But I would just make the additional specific point around businesses, which is that, of course, as well as providing incredibly important goods and services, they also are our tax base. So if we lose businesses at the rate that we're seeing today, that will have further negative consequences for revenue, for personal taxation, for funding public services. So the situation for business does warrant this attention.
Indeed. And again, an awful lot worse after 2 years of on-off lockdowns, which again, Labour called for to last longer, deeper, sooner and everything. So, your hands aren't clean in Labour about this, as well as the Tory hands aren't clean as well.
Julie, we've talked about this before.
I know.
Had there not been a lockdown and people had not had that financial support,
Sweden,
they would have voluntarily not gone out to businesses, and that would have been
I would have happily been out. I would have happily been out in pubs and restaurants and I made a point actually of going out more when I was able to than I would normally do so, because I wanted to help keep those businesses afloat, and I knew I was one of the lucky people who still had an income. So I'm sorry. Let people at least make choices. Let me talk to you though. You mentioned hospitals and schools. There's some talk about warm hubs. I found this extraordinary this week. 21st century, first world country. We're talking about we're going to provide community centres and libraries as places where people can go to keep warm this winter. I don't know how people think those community centres and libraries are going to be able to afford to pay their bills. We've already heard about schools, hospitals, care homes. Where are they going to get the money from to pay their bills? You're talking about a domestic energy price cap. You've not talked about a business energy price cap.
Yeah, look, I understand the scale of the crisis, Julia, means that people are asking these entirely reasonable questions. And things I'm putting forward today, that cut to business rates, that energy-intensive contingency fund, that, by the way, not going ahead with the national insurance rise, the government raised taxes on all businesses with. I'm putting those forward because I can fund those. I can say how I would pay for those, which is a rise in digital services tax, and they're worth billions of pounds, and they're a real relief now. A cap on business energy use specifically would clearly be a massive item. And until I was confident I could come on this programme and tell you exactly how that could be paid for, I wouldn't do it. But I do recognise that the scale of the crisis means we must keep this offer under review and come back to it if it is not sufficient to meet the scale of the crisis. But whenever I come forward with plans, I'll know you're going to reasonably ask me, well, how would you pay for that? Yeah. And that's why I can put forward these measures today, which are ones that make a real difference. Not solve all the problems, but make a real difference, and we can do immediately.
A question I put to both Tory party candidates at Hustings and Norwich last week was, do they not accept that actually one of the reasons we're in part of this mess is because of net zero policies, by going to net zero by 2050 without actually a plan for actually how to do this. I always said it was going to impoverish the country. It meant that we were less resilient to cope with the Ukraine crisis, the spike in energy costs there. Do you, in Labour, and you, Jonathan Reynolds, personally, do you accept that net zero policy is part of the problem?
No, it's not part of the problem. I think you all make a fair assessment that the government's plan for net zero is wanting. But frankly, net zero, the measures we have seen, have reduced what would be, without those things, a further demand for gas at these incredibly high prices. And you cannot solve a problem in volatile gas prices by being more dependent on gas. And actually, domestic production in the UK...
you produce more gas. You have more gas storage facilities.
This year, Julie, the quantum of loss of Russian supply to Europe could never be replaced by UK production. That is simply not possible.
But we would be energy sufficient in this country. We built more nuclear power stations. If we were more, if we diversified fossil fuels and nuclear power, which we deliberately have not done because you all, Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, you've all signed up to net zero. If we'd done that, we would be more resilient.
Nuclear is a huge part of net zero. Under the last Labour government, every single nuclear power station in this country had its operating life extended. The problem has been in the last 12 years, we haven't put plans in place for the fact that there is a natural life to those power stations and they need to be replaced. Okay. Our solar capacity, our wind farms, they are all secure domestic energy supplies to replace those with gas supplies, which, let's be clear, even if we produced more gas, which we have been doing in the UK, that would still be at a global price. We're part of a European and global commodities market. That wouldn't be any cheaper than the market rate. The sheer scale of loss of Russian supply to Europe is the cause of driving that price higher. If we were more dependent on that, that would be much worse.
Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. I only got a minute left with you. Very briefly, there's a new report out from the Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza, about fewer children growing up in two-parent households, a quarter of all kids in lone households, and 44% at some point in their childhood, they're living with just one parent or with grandparents or the like. Do you think that a two-parent family is key to raising a child?
No, I think government policy should be there to support families, but families come in all shapes and sizes. They're more complex than simply saying it should be about two parents. People face very different life circumstances. Where government policy should support all families of all different shapes and sizes is in things like making sure if you go to work, you earn enough through a real living wage to be able to feed your family. You should be able to heat your own home, not be dependent on heat banks or heat hubs or anything else like that. You should have the employment rights that let you see your family as well as combine that with your working life. And that's what I would like to see the focus on, if that's what the Children's Commissioner is saying, rather than saying exactly what a family should look like.
Jonathan Reynolds, really appreciate you joining us. Time is up. Shadow Business Secretary, Labour MP, Jonathan Reynolds.